What if, what if the most foundational way we categorize human beings, the way we sort our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues, even our perceived enemies,
Yeah.
what if that is not just, you know, morally compromised, but literally a hallucination?
I mean, it is a jarring premise, right? Because we spend our entire lives just assuming the labels we place on humanity are, well, reflections of the natural world. But if you strip away the habit of using them, you start to realize we might be trapped inside this massive architectural error.
Yeah, and welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you here with us, the learner. You have handed us this massive, incredibly dense, just profound stack of source material today.
It really is. I mean, we are looking at treatises on philosophical architecture, the deep mechanics of self-deception, societal deconstruction, and basically the invisible frameworks that dictate how human beings make meaning out of just, well, raw chaos.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is actually highly specific today.
Right.
We're going to synthesize all these materials into what basically amounts to a masterclass on dismantling the ultimate societal fiction, which is the concept of race.
Exactly. But, and this is key, it's not just about tearing things down, right? It is about rescuing the real, material, beautiful reality of human culture that this fiction has kind of painted over for centuries.
Tainted over, yes. And just to be completely clear right up front, as we navigate this stuff, we are maintaining a strictly impartial analytical perspective. Like, the source material delves into deeply ingrained societal structures, government systems, historical movements, all of it.
Yeah, and our job here isn't to take political sides or endorse any specific ideologies.
No, not at all. Our job is just to report on the profound analytical frameworks presented in these texts. The goal is to help you, the listener, fundamentally upgrade your own mental operating system.
Right, moving from what the sources call a lazy visual shorthand to rigorous historical intelligence.
Okay, so let's unpack this because it's a lot.
It is a lot. And if we are going to dismantle a concept as massive as race, we really can't just attack the concept directly. The texts are very clear on this.
We have to lay the groundwork first, right?
Exactly. First, we have to zoom way out and examine the machinery of the human mind itself. Like, we have to understand how we get tricked into worshiping abstractions in the first place.
Yeah, and I found this foundational idea so compelling. The sources draw this really hard line between meaning and matter. And what I loved is they don't demonize meaning.
No, they don't. They acknowledge that human beings actively need concepts.
Right. Like, if I want to coordinate with you to build a bridge or trade goods or, I don't know, establish a society, we can't just rely on raw physical sensation. We need words like the economy or a contract or a border.
Yeah, meaning is architecture. Raw sensation just doesn't scale. I mean, think about a national border. If you and I walk across a field, there is no physical, biological line painted on the dirt that the earth somehow grew itself.
Right, there's no glowing red line on the grass.
Exactly. But if we want to organize two different political states, we have to invent the concept of the border. We both have to agree on that abstraction just to orient ourselves.
But the danger, and this is according to the text, the danger is what happens next. Once these concepts, these invisible boundaries and systems, become stable enough, we develop this kind of amnesia. We suffer from what they call abstraction worship.
We literally forget that we were the ones who drew the blueprints.
Yes. We start treating these human-made instruments as if they are physical laws of nature. We bow down to them as if they have independent agency, like, gravity or the weather.
And if we look at how this plays out in modern society, the implications are just staggering. We elevate concepts into what the author terms invisible monarchies.
Oh, I love that phrase, invisible monarchies.
Right. Just think about the language we use every single day. We talk about the economy as if it is a sentient being, like the markets are angry today, or the economy is demanding a sacrifice.
Yes. Or, like, the algorithm decided. History demands it. We hear these phrases on the news constantly. And I just thought it was shorthand, right? A figure of speech.
Most people do.
But the source material argues this phrasing is actively dangerous. Why is that?
Well, because it creates a profound displacement of responsibility.
Yeah.
It induces this massive passivity in the population.
How so?
When you invoke an abstraction as if it is a force of nature acting on its own, you are concealing the actual human beings who are pulling the levers. You hide the human designs, the human errors, the human beneficiaries right behind this fog of grandeur.
Wow. Okay, so if The economy is struggling, and people are losing their homes, saying the market decided makes it sound like a hurricane came through.
Exactly.
And, like, you can't sue a hurricane. You can't vote out a hurricane.
Precisely. If the abstraction is imagined as a weather god, people just stop examining the material mechanisms beneath it. They stop asking the critical questions.
It's like, who wrote the rules?
Right. Who exactly wrote this specific zoning rule? Which specific human beings benefit from this interest rate? Who is actively enforcing this scarcity? We treat the concept as if it just descended from the sky rather than arising from layered, intentional human activity.
And that makes a society incredibly governable by its own symbols.
It really does.
Okay, so how do we break this spell? Because honestly, I catch myself doing this all the time. The sources provide a mental tool for this, and I really want to spend some time on it because it might be one of the most clarifying mental models I've ever encountered. It's called the Meteor Test.
Oh, the meteor test is phenomenal. It's this perfect discipline for clearing illusion. Its entire purpose is to force the mind to sever the symbolic layer of reality from the operational material layer.
Okay, let's walk through it for the listener. Let's say a massive, city-sized meteor is hurtling through space, and it is on a direct collision course with Earth. Now, apply the test. Can the concept of the economy stop that meteor?
No. It has no mass. It cannot interact with the rock.
Right. A diversified stock portfolio cannot deflect it. National pride cannot slow it down. A legal contract cannot negotiate with it.
Not at all.
None of these abstractions, no matter how deeply we revere them or how completely they run our daily lives, can physically touch that meteor.
They cannot. Now, those concepts might profoundly dictate how human beings respond to the meteor, right?
Right, like who gets to be safe.
Exactly. The concept of the economy might dictate who gets access to the early warning systems or who can afford a bunker. The concept of a national border might dictate where people are legally allowed to flee, but the concepts themselves do not enter the collision.
I want to make sure I really have this locked in because the text uses a specific example. If I have a little dollar bill in my pocket and the meteor hits me, the bill burns.
Mm-hmm.
But the text is saying the value of the bill didn't burn because the value isn't real in a physical sense.
That is correct. The paper note burns because the paper note is fiber, ink, weight, and friction. It is material reality. But the abstraction of money, the meaning we assign to that fiber and ink that cannot burn because it was never physically there to begin with, concepts only acquire force when human beings translate them into material reality.
They need human hands.
They need bodies in space and time.
Yeah.
A law only matters if it is written down by a human, interpreted by a human, and enforced by human bodies carrying physical tools of enforcement.
That makes so much sense.
A reputation only matters if human vocal cords speak it and human brains act upon it.
So the core takeaway for you, the listener, before we take this to its ultimate conclusion, is to run your world through this meteor test. The map is not the actual terrain. Reverence is not mass.
No, it's not.
And an idea, no matter how powerful, only has the power that physical humans grant it. Which brings us, inevitably, to the granddaddy of all societal fictions.
Here we go.
Right. If concepts only have power because we physically arrange the world around them, what happens when we point the meteor test at human biology?
Well, what happens when we analyze how we arrange the world around the concept of race?
The source material dives into this with a level of rigor that is just breathtaking. It takes everything we just established about abstraction worship and aims it directly at our classification systems.
And the foundational assertion here is unequivocal. The sources demand we face it without flinching. Humanity is a single species. It is not a vertical ladder of interhuman kinds.
Okay, but let me pause you right there because I want to voice the immediate pushback a listener might have. Visible variation is real.
Yes.
We can see it. Skin tone, facial structure, hair texture. If I look at a crowd, I see differences. Are the texts telling me to deny my own eyes?
Not at all. The texts explicitly acknowledge that visible variation exists, ancestry markers exist. But here is the crucial philosophical distinction. Visible variation does not equate to separate moral, intellectual, or civilizational essences.
The phrase they use in the document, which I highlighted, is phenotype is not ontology.
Yes. Phenotype is the observable physical characteristics. Ontology is the nature of being the fundamental essence of a thing.
Okay, so how does that connect?
The texts are arguing that leaping from a visible physical distinction to a conclusion about a person's inner human essence is an architectural failure. It isn't science. It's a projection stabilized by habit and law.
There is a line in the material that completely stopped me in my tracks. It says, The eye is a poor philosopher.
It is such a brilliant distillation of the problem.
It really is. But, I mean, I use my eyes for everything. If I'm driving, my eyes tell me if a car is braking.
Mhm.
If I'm hiking, my eyes tell me if that's a stick or a snake. Why is the eye a poor philosopher when it comes to humans?
Because the eye is exceptional at noticing contrast rapidly, but it understands almost nothing about causality or history by itself.
Ah, okay.
Think about it. Skin is highly visible, melanin is highly visible, but generational dispossession is invisible. Cultural adaptation over centuries is invisible.
Wow.
State violence, forced migration, historical redlining. These are massive tectonic forces that shape human lives and communities, but they are entirely invisible to the naked eye.
So because we can't see the history, we grab onto the first visible trait we can find and just use it as an explanation for everything.
Exactly. A shallow society reaches for what can be perceived in a microsecond, because what can be seen quickly feels like a concrete fact.
But again, isn't that just a survival mechanism, like sorting things visually?
It is a mechanism, yes.
Hmm.
But when applied to human complexity, the texts argue it reverses the natural order of personhood.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about how a human life actually unfolds. A person enters the world as a complex, dynamic human being embedded in a specific history and culture. The label, the census box, the inherited myth that is an abstraction applied long after the fact.
Right.
But race thinking trains the mind to reverse that sequence.
It trains us to meet the classification before the encounter.
Yes. As the text says, a face becomes a file.
Oh, that is chilling.
Yeah.
A face becomes a file.
The inherited category floods your mind before you've even had a chance to process the actual human being in front of you. You see a visible marker. And instead of engaging in the long, demanding labor of understanding that individuals' specific history, their regional context, their personal memory...
The category pretends to complete the interpretation for you.
Exactly. The category arrives first, and the infinite density of a human life is violently compressed to fit inside it. It is the absolute peak of cognitive laziness.
Okay, I'm tracking with this,
Right.
but I have another major piece of pushback. If we say that race is an architectural fiction, that this biological ladder doesn't exist, aren't we just erasing human diversity?
That's a common fear, yeah.
Because are the texts arguing that we should all just pretend we are one bland, uniform, gray monolith? That feels like losing something beautiful.
The sources address this exact anxiety, and they argue the polar opposite. They argue that the fiction of race is actually what suppresses and hides true human diversity.
Yeah, how so?
Because race acts as a parasite. It is a counterfeit summary that parasitizes real lived differences.
A parasite.
Uh-huh.
Okay, let's explore that metaphor.
Well, the concept of race doesn't have any actual biological or cultural generative power of its own. It survives by attaching itself to realities that do exist and then falsely claiming authorship over them.
Okay, so people observe real differences.
Mm-hmm.
Like we see different culinary traditions, different speech rhythms, different religious practices, different body language within families.
Those are dense, beautiful realities.
But instead of tracing those realities back to their actual sources, we just use the shortcut.
We use the parasite. Instead of tracing a culinary tradition through migration patterns, agricultural history, and cultural exchange, the impatient mind just says, oh, it's because of their race. The explanatory work is stolen by the wrong concept.
It's like taking a massive, high-resolution photograph of human history and compressing it into a terrible, pixelated 1 kilobyte file. You lose all the data.
You lose everything that matters.
And the sources make a fierce demand for precision here. They insist we stop inflating the word race to cover things it has no business covering.
Yes, they list the distinctions we absolutely must make if we want to claim historical intelligence.
Let's go through them.
Ancestry is about descent and genetic lineage. Ethnicity is about shared historical origin, customs, and collective memory. Nationality is a legal and political belonging to a state. Religion is a faith and philosophical system. Culture is the lived, daily patterns of meaning.
And when you compress all of those distinct, dynamic, breathing realities into a single, static census box called race, you make your understanding of the world objectively worse.
You obscure the causal chain of reality. Culture is animate. Culture borrows, it resists, it hybridizes, it remembers trauma, it invents. Race thinking takes all that living motion and just freezes it into a static biological essence.
Why do we do it then? If it makes our understanding of the world so much worse, why is this fiction so universally adopted?
The sources call it a speed versus fidelity bargain.
Speed versus fidelity.
Yeah. Race is an interpretive shortcut. It offers the mind the highly addictive feeling of an answer arriving quickly. If you can categorize someone in a fraction of a second based on a visual marker, you feel like you know something about them.
Right, it gives you a false sense of certainty.
But what you save in time, you lose entirely in truth and fidelity. It is the chosen tool of an impatient civilization. We would rather sort people into easily managed administrative boxes than undertake the really difficult, time-consuming work of understanding their complex historical formations.
So understanding race not as a biological truth, but as this lazy, counterfeit summary, a parasite on culture, this naturally forces a massive question.
What's that?
What exactly is racism then? Because typically we define racism as an emotional state. We define it as hatred or prejudice. But if race is a structural fiction, racism has to be something more mechanistic, right?
Yes, exactly. The text suggests that hatred is merely a symptom. The root of racism is a massive systemic cognitive failure. It is an interpretive shortcut masquerading as knowledge.
The author connects this to a linguistic analogy in the source material that I found just incredibly illuminating. They talk about what happens when a lazy reader encounters a coined, unfamiliar word in a structurally coherent sentence.
Ah, yes. The hominismistic example.
Right. The made-up word, hominismistic. Let's look at the mechanics of that.
Okay, so when a poor reader encounters hominismistic in a text, their immediate response is not curiosity. They don't look at the surrounding syntax or the context clues to infer the meaning.
What do?
Their response is a ritual of disqualification. They say, that is not a word.
They invalidate the entire sentence at the threshold.
Yes. They substitute procedural policing for the labor of understanding. Because the word isn't already in their internal inherited dictionary, they refuse to participate in meaning-making.
And the sources draw a direct, devastating parallel between that lazy reader and the racist gaze.
They do. The racist gaze looks at a human being who is an unfathomably dense convergence of history, memory, chance, education, geographical injury, and triumph. And it invalidates all of that density based on one categorized visual trait. It performs a violent compression.
It essentially says, I don't need to read the rest of the sentence. This visible trait will stand in for the entire person.
Exactly. It's an epistemic collapse. It entirely relieves the judge from the burden of having to learn anything new.
And what makes this so insidious and so difficult to dismantle is the emotional architecture that supports this false world. The text points out that this compression isn't just an intellectual error, it is deeply effective. Fear and disgust are distributed before thought.
This is a crucial point. Children don't read a manifesto on racial hierarchy before they become prejudiced.
Right. They don't study it in a textbook.
Exactly. They absorb the tightening of a parent's grip on their hand. They absorb presumptive distance, unspoken caution, or televised characters long before they learn a formal theory of race. By the time the explicit claim of racism is voiced, the emotional grooves in the nervous system are already laid down.
Which means you can't just debate it away with a spreadsheet of facts.
Yeah.
The body has been trained to physically react to a phantom.
Right.
And this brings us to an incredibly powerful historical example used in the texts to prove how this specific cognitive failure, this reliance on a false architecture, doesn't just make a society immoral, it makes practically, logistically incompetent. I really want to spend some time on the Hitler strategy anecdote.
It is a profound application of this framework. The text analyzes Adolf Hitler's strategy in World War II, not merely as a pinnacle of human evil, which it obviously was, but as a system fundamentally boomed by the physics of its own false architecture. The assertion is that supremacy itself is a strategic liability.
Walk me through that, because we usually think of supremacy as a weapon that makes an empire stronger, albeit ruthlessly.
Well, it creates a fatal blind spot. Hitler operated under what the texts call a myth of divine infallibility and a fiction of enemy inferiority. Because Nazi ideology rigidly demanded that adversaries, particularly the Soviets and the Allies, be viewed as subhuman or decadent, Hitler and his high command were structurally incapable of engaging in empathetic research.
Empathetic research.
Yeah.
Meaning actually understanding your enemy's capacity.
Exactly. Empathy here isn't about compassion, it's about accurate data collection. To defeat an enemy, you must accurately assess their adaptability, their intelligence, and their resources. But they couldn't.
Give me an example.
Let's look at Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. They looked at the Soviet Union and dismissed it as a colossus of clay.
They completely ignored its massive industrial and mobilization capacity.
Right. The ideological filter of racial hierarchy forbade them from seeing the Soviets as capable of complex logistical reorganization. They assumed the structure would collapse in weeks because inferior races couldn't sustain a defense against the master race.
So they just didn't prepare.
Exactly. So they failed to pack adequate winter gear. They failed to plan for a protracted logistical supply chain deep into Russian territory.
Because racism physically blinds you to reality. If your entire societal architecture is built on the premise that the people across the border are genetically incapable of industrial brilliance, and then they produce thousands of T-34 tanks, your operating system literally cannot process the data.
They rejected the reality of the material world. They systematically excluded and exiled brilliant minds like Jewish physicists from their own ranks because their categorization system prioritized a visual or ancestry fiction over actual intellectual output.
Unbelievable.
The refusal to see the world as it actually was, the refusal to abandon the abstraction worship of race, led to compounding, catastrophic logistical blunders.
The illusion of supremacy replaced the rigor of observation. I think that is the ultimate proof that operating on false categories doesn't just make you a bad person. It disconnects your entire operating system from reality. It makes you incompetent.
Now, if we carry the structural analysis forward to modern society, the texts offer a fascinating and highly impartial observation about how we manage these fictions today. It examines modern protest movements and government structures.
Yes, and I want to reiterate to the listener right here. The sources are not making a partisan political statement with this next part. They are making a structural observation about the grammar of society.
Right.
The text uses the Black Lives Matter movement as an example.
The author notes that Black Lives Matter performs indispensable, necessary moral work. It interrupts societal denial and names structured, historical injury against populations that have been targeted. However, the text points out a profound, almost tragic paradox in how this must be done.
To fight anti-Black harm, the movement is forced to organize around the category of Black.
Yes. It has to use the very identity, the very conceptual box that was invented and weaponized against it. It must take place within the exact same grammar built by the distortion it is trying to resist.
The text isn't criticizing the movement at all. It's highlighting the tragic necessity of it.
The deeper societal scandal is that this false frame, the fiction of race, remains structurally alive enough to demand management, legislation, rebuttal, and defense.
The analogy they use in the text is brilliant. It compares it to a society building an incredibly elaborate, multi-billion-dollar legal system to regulate unicorn ownership.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor.
You have unicorn taxation laws, unicorn anti-theft task forces, unicorn zoning permits. The absurdity isn't that the regulations are sophisticated or well-intentioned. The absurdity is that society is forced to manage the daily fallout of an exhausted lie.
It is proof of a humiliating civilizational failure. We are a civilization that possesses orbital instruments that can photograph galaxies, machine-scale memory, and instant global translation. Yet we are still bogged down, spending massive amounts of energy managing the consequences of a primitive visual sorting myth.
Which is why the text argues that merely managing racism or trying to be nicer within the categories isn't enough. The deeper goal has to be what they call functional reclamation.
We have to completely dismantle the conveyor belt that keeps the category central to social meaning.
And this requires a massive upgrade to our mental operating system. So how do we actually do that? How do you, the listener, apply this tomorrow morning?
Well, the sources don't just leave us floating in high-level philosophy. They provide a structural tool.
Yes. The text titled Architect of Your Own Meaning introduces a framework called the 4DP. Let's apply this transformation architecture to the societal lie of race.
Okay, so the 4DP framework stands for target, truth, totally, and title. These are the 4 load-bearing pillars required for any profound personal or societal transformation. If we want to execute functional reclamation, we have to rebuild on these 4 pillars.
Okay, let's make them one by one. Pillar 1, truth. The text calls this radical self-honesty.
Truth is the pillar of fidelity to reality as it actually is, not as we have been conditioned to see it. In the context of deconstructing race, this means stopping the internal self-deception. It means recognizing continuously that the labels we inherited, the visual shorthand we use daily to make sense of crowds, are just stories. They are not biological destiny.
And this requires real vulnerability. The text asks us to catch our own defense mechanisms in real time. Like when you are walking down the street and you feel a tightening in your chest when someone from a different background approaches, you have to ask yourself a hard question.
Right. Are you reacting to a real physical threat? Or are you reacting to an old story about what constitutes danger that you absorbed from decades of media, movies, or cultural osmosis?
The challenge to the listener is profound. Are you willing to see your own cognitive laziness? Are you willing to admit the moments when your inherited categories are doing the thinking for you?
Because without that radical, uncomfortable truth, the rest of the framework just collapses.
Which brings us to pillar 2, target. Flexible goals and direction. What is our target here? Because ending racism feels too vague, too massive.
The target is what the texts define as historical intelligence. The direction we are aiming for is a society and an individual mind that reads disparities through material arrangements rather than lazily assigning them to nature.
So if I see a disparity in wealth or health between two different communities, instead of saying, oh, group A is naturally better than group B,
Right.
historical intelligence aims for an interpretive maturity where I trace that difference through zoning, history, policy, and resource allocation.
Exactly. And the flexible part of the target pillar means being adaptable in how you advocate for this, how you converse with others about it, but unwavering in the ultimate direction.
Which is a world where human difference is acknowledged, celebrated, but never biologically ranked.
Yes.
Okay, pillar 3. Totally, all-in commitment. Now,
Yeah.
I want to push back hard here because I think this is where a lot of people might misunderstand the text.
Okay, let's hear it.
The text insists on a double movement. It says, we must totally deny race ontological dignity, meaning we reject the idea that there are biological subkinds. But if we do that, aren't we just doing the toxic colorblind thing?
Right, ignoring the problem.
Yeah, aren't we just saying I don't see race, which usually means ignoring systemic racism entirely?
That is the exact trap the totally pillar prevents. You have to look at the second half of the double movement.
Okay.
You must totally deny the biological reality of race, and simultaneously, you must totally confront racialization as a real historical machinery. You must be all in on both truths at once.
Explain how that works in practice.
Well, the text is very critical of half measures. It argues that to affirm the fiction of race in the name of political realism, to say, well, race is real because society treats it as real, is intellectually weak, it surrenders the architectural truth.
Right.
However, to deny the historical process in the name of philosophical purity, to say, race isn't real, so I don't need to care about historical redlining or discrimination, that is morally weak.
Oh, that is so clarifying. You have to hold both. The concept is a biological lie, but the structural damage caused by the lie over the last 400 years is devastatingly real and must be repaired.
Precisely, total commitment to the complex truth. You dismantle the fiction while repairing the material damage it caused.
You can't just be colorblind and pretend history didn't happen, but you also can't worship the categories if it's permanent.
Exactly.
And finally, we have pillar 4, title, the concept of nounships. I love this idea.
Nounships are about the practice of holding identity lightly. They are about recognizing that the labels we use are temporary states of experience, not fixed, permanent identities.
Because race is the ultimate rigid title forced onto a human being. It takes the fluidity of a human life and turns it into a static noun.
Yeah.
It says, you are this forever because of how you look. End of sentence.
Removing this rigid title allows us to return to contextual personhood. It allows an individual to say, I am a person currently experiencing this cultural inheritance, or I am navigating the effects of this historical categorization.
Rather than I am defined fundamentally at my core by this racial category.
Yes, it returns us to the foundational truth of the texts. There is no human race but the human race.
So we have the 4DP framework, truth, target, totally, and title. But the sources don't stop there. They argue that to truly execute this functional reclamation in the trenches of daily life, we need granular analytical tools for decoding reality in real time.
We do. We need to be able to catch the fiction as it is happening inside our own bodies and in the structures around us.
Which brings us to dimensional hominy and linear tracing of reality.
Dimensional hominy is a diagnostic tool for mapping the layers of your internal experience. It is about slowing down the mind. The text breaks down a sequence that most people completely conflate into one blur: sensation, feeling, thought, and emotion.
Let's workshop this because it is so practical.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take the late-night street encounter the text hints at and really expand it. You are walking down a city street at night. You are alone. Up ahead, you see a group of strangers who look visually different from you, and they are speaking a language you don't understand. Let's trace the sequence slowly.
Okay, step 1. Sensation. This is the raw data entering your physical receptors, visual input of human forms, auditory input of unfamiliar vocal patterns. That is all sensation is.
Step 2, feeling. The physiological response in your body. Your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tense slightly. Your pupils dilate.
Step 3, thought. This is the crucial juncture. This is the narrative your mind applies to bridge the sensation and the physiological feeling.
And here is where the societal fiction lives.
Yes, the mind accesses a cultural script. It applies an inherited racial story about danger that says unfamiliar visible markers plus unfamiliar language equals threat.
And finally, step 4, emotion. Because of that specific thought, the physiological feeling solidifies into the emotion of fear. The thought, the inherited story, hijack the body's response.
Dimensional homonymy asks you to realize that the sequence is not inevitable. The physiological feeling of a racing heart and heightened senses is entirely neutral.
Wait, really? Neutral?
Yeah. That exact same physiological feeling could just as easily be interpreted as the emotion of curiosity or alertness or even excitement if the thought applied was different.
Oh, wow. If the thought was, oh, I wonder what language that is, the feeling becomes curiosity.
Exactly. But because the inherited racial fiction acts as a switchboard, it routes the feeling directly into fear. You have to see how the story hijacked your biology. You are reacting to a phantom, a ghost of a social fiction, not the actual human being standing 20 feet away.
Once you can catch that internal process and realize your fear is narrative, not biological, you have to apply the external process.
Yeah.
Linear reality deduction.
Right. If we strip away the lazy abstraction of race to explain the world, we are now obligated to trace the linear, material reality of why things are the way they are.
If a massive disparity exists in a community, let's say a disparity in educational outcomes or health, the racist gaze lazily says, well, it's because of their nature. It's inherent.
It uses a parasite.
But historical intelligence demands we trace the material arrangements. We have to look at the physical physics of the society.
We have to trace the zoning laws, the property tax funding models for schools, the historical policing practices, the legacy of redlining that prevented wealth accumulation.
And the sources provide a mathematical metaphor for this that we absolutely have to unpack.
Yeah.
The pseudo-algebraic mapping, A over B.
Yes, it is a brilliant way to map human potential against environmental reality. Let's focus on that first part, A over B.
Walk me through what A and B represent.
Well, A represents the raw, inherent human potential of an individual or a community. Intelligence, creativity, resilience. B represents the structural context or the environment that this potential is forced to filter through. B is the denominator.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Say A is a child's natural aptitude for science and learning, and B, the environment, is a school district with lead in the drinking water, outdated textbooks, no advanced placement classes, and chronic underfunding because of historical redlining.
Exactly. The mathematical reality is that you cannot accurately judge the numerator, A, if it is being suppressed by a massive restrictive denominator, B.
You just can't.
You cannot look at the outcome of that equation and declare that the child's raw potential, A, is biologically inferior. The structural filter, B, was designed to extract, exclude, or surveil that potential.
You can't blame the seed when it's planted in toxic soil.
Exactly.
The lazy, racist mind looks at the outcome, ignores the denominator completely, and says, see, Group A is just naturally less capable. It's an architectural failure of logic.
Upgrading our mental operating system requires us to demand the full equation. We must replace the false compression of race with the rigorous, demanding work of identifying the material and historical arrangements.
We have to stop using a visual shortcut and start demanding accurate data about how the world was actually built.
We really do.
I feel like my brain has been completely rewired over the course of this conversation. We have been on quite a journey today, learner. Let's take a breath and synthesize what we've discovered from this incredible stack of texts.
Yeah, we began by diagnosing the mind's vulnerability to abstraction worship, how we forget that concepts like the economy or borders are human tools, and we mistakenly revere them as physical forces.
We subjected those abstractions to the meteor test, proving that concepts only have force when human beings enforce them in the material world. We then aimed that exact same meteor at the concept of race, establishing that humanity is a single species.
We learned that phenotype is not ontology, and that relying on the I as a philosopher is a recipe for deep ignorance.
We saw how race operates as a parasite on the beautiful, lived reality of culture and history. We examined the terrible bargain of speed versus fidelity, how society accepts a counterfeit summary just to avoid the labor of understanding complex human realities.
We redefined racism not merely as emotional hatred, but as a catastrophic cognitive and architectural failure. We saw how this false compression physically blinds people to reality, leading to devastating logistical blunders like the Hitler strategy in World War II.
And finally, we armed ourselves with the 40P framework, target, truth, totally, title, and the analytical tools of dimensional homonymy and linear tracing. We mapped the internal process of how narrative hijacks biology and the external requirement to trace the structural denominators that shape human outcomes.
As the text powerfully concludes, a civilization equipped with orbital instruments, genome mapping, and machine-scale memory should not be stalled by primitive, visual ranking myths.
No, it shouldn't. Upgrading our mental operating system away from this lazy shorthand is not just a personal goal. It is a civilizational imperative. We have to become the architects of our own meaning, demanding historical intelligence over visual illusions.
The technological tools evolved faster than our interpretive truthfulness. It is time for our maturity to catch up. We must honor the rich, lived histories of humanity without allowing inherited, fictional labels to remain the governing architecture of personhood.
So, learner, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought inspired directly by the profound material we've unpacked today. We have spent this deep dive entirely focused on dismantling the invisible monarchy of race. But if the human mind is so easily tricked into worshiping counterfeit summaries, so easily trained to let an abstraction do the thinking for it.
What other invisible monarchies in your daily life are you currently bowing down to?
Exactly, is the essential question to carry forward. What other massive, unquestioned concepts about success, about gender, about value, about time are dictating your physiological reactions, your fears, and your identity simply because you haven't yet run them through the meteor test?
The blueprints are in your hands.
The architecture of your life is yours to examine and yours to redesign. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures, keep demanding the linear reality beneath the abstractions, and keep building your own meaning. We will catch you next time.